Another war could break out right now, one that Donald Trump previously announced. Unexpected anti-government protests have erupted in Cuba. Rallies against power outages and food shortages turned into a huge scandal after a meeting with the authorities. Anti-government demonstrators attacked the Communist Party office in northern Cuba. This spontaneous protest was a rare display of public discontent triggered by worsening power outages, which have been further aggravated by the oil blockade imposed by the United States of America. And now footage is coming from Cuba showing burning streets and truly large demonstrations. Immediately after that, the frightened president of Cuba, Miguel Díaz-Canel, officially confirmed for the first time that his government is in fact carrying out changes. Negotiations with the administration of Donald Trump after 3 months of an effective oil blockade of the island. He stated that the contacts are aimed at finding solutions to bilateral disagreements through dialogue, identifying areas of cooperation to counter common threats, and strengthening security in Latin America. Essentially, he stated that he is ready to make a deal with Donald Trump, but warned that the negotiation process could take a long time. My name is Alexi. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, and leave any comment under this episode. And also subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechi News. The link is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in. So the situation in Cuba is worsening due to the energy blockade by the United States. It's gotten to the point where people have lost their patience, they've even lost their fear of protesting, which is something unusual for Cuba. It is reported that today protests have begun in Cuba against power outages and food shortages on the island. But after government officials came out to the protesters and said, "Listen, things aren't that bad, you're exaggerating," the protest escalated into clashes and even riots. Anti-government demonstrators attacked the Communist Party office in northern Cuba. The incident, which happened on Saturday morning, was reported by Cuba's state media. This spontaneous protest was a rare display of public discontent triggered by worsening power outages, which have been further aggravated by the US oil blockade. A protest against power outages and food shortages, which seemed to start peacefully in the city of Moron late Friday night, grew in size in the early hours of Saturday morning. So these protests went on there all night. And here the local media, let me emphasize, these are pro-government media, are reporting this, which means the scale is actually even bigger, because pro-government sources obviously downplay it. So the local media write, and I quote, "What started out peacefully after an exchange of views with the local authorities turned into acts of vandalism against the headquarters of the Municipal Party Committee. A small group of people threw stones at the entrance of the building and allegedly set fire to the reception furniture out on the street. The protesters also attacked several other government institutions in the area, specifically a pharmacy and a state-run market. Well, and then videos on social media showed a large fire and people actually throwing stones at the windows of the building, while in the background there were shouts of freedom."
Subtitles created by David Torzo.
Subtitles by Dima Torzak.
I would like to note that this year the United States increased pressure on Cuba after they detained the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, in January, who is the most important foreign benefactor of the Cuban communists. US President Donald Trump stopped the supply of Venezuelan oil to Cuba and threatened to impose tariffs against any country that sells oil to Cuba. This increased pressure on the economy, which is already suffering from shortages of food, fuel, electricity, and medicine. Over the past few weeks, Trump has made a number of statements claiming that Cuba is on the verge of collapse or is seeking to make a deal with the United States. On Friday, the Cuban government stated that yes, it has indeed begun negotiations with Washington in an attempt to ease the crisis. Public protests, especially violent ones, are extremely rare in Cuba. Cuba's 2019 constitution grants citizens the right to demonstrate, but the law that more specifically defines this right to protest, is stuck in the legislature, leaving those who take to the streets in a kind of legal uncertainty. So, in Cuba there seems to be a right to protest, but it hasn't been fully legalized. So, it appears there isn't truly a right to demonstrate. It is known that, in the end, the police detained 5 people and 1 person allegedly fell and is now in the hospital. It is claimed that he was intoxicated, but that's what the authorities say. No one else was injured, but this seems to be just the beginning. Over the past week, several small groups of Havana residents have been banging on pots and pans to protest the prolonged power outages. On Monday, students staged a sit-in protest on the steps of Havana University after the government suspended in-person classes, blaming it on the US oil blockade. The fuel shortage has significantly reduced public transportation services, making it difficult or even impossible for teachers and students to meet for classes. And overall, you could say that the protest mood is starting to grow in Cuba. I mean, it's clear that these forms of protest are as peaceful as possible, but still, for Cuba, that's quite something. Right. And this scared the Cuban authorities because there haven't even been protests like this on the island for many years, since people are intimidated. People protesting in the streets shows how difficult the situation is there. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel officially confirmed for the first time that his government is negotiating with Donald Trump's administration after 3 months of an effective oil blockade of the island. In a statement quoted by the Cuban publication Cuba Debate, he said that contacts with Washington are aimed at finding solutions to bilateral disagreements through dialogue, identifying areas of cooperation to counter common threats, and strengthening security in Latin America. At the same time, the Cuban leader warned that the process will most likely take a long time. Well, the fact that the Cuban government is actually negotiating with the Americans was admitted by the president of Cuba during a speech to the media. This doesn't happen very often in Cuba, once again. And this has already been called a continuation of the February 5th event during which Díaz-Canel warned that Cuba is approaching a situation that will require extreme measures. Considering the economic crisis, frequent power outages, and fuel shortages, which have worsened due to the oil blockade organized by Trump. So, even a month ago he was kind of hinting that, well, they would have to take some extraordinary steps. For a whole month, Cuba tried to pretend that they were managing, but it turned out they weren't. Díaz-Canel stated that he led the negotiations from the Cuban side together with the former president of the country, Raúl Castro, and other high-ranking officials of the Communist Party of Cuba. The American side, by the way, has not commented on these negotiations yet, but Trump did hint that yes, such negotiations are taking place. And recently, sources from the Atlantic in the White House said that Cuba could become Trump's next target after Venezuela and Iran, In January, the American president allowed for the possibility of what he called a friendly takeover of the island if Havana refused to make a deal with Washington. Now it looks like they're actually going for the deal. At the same time, according to sources from Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal, the White House has developed a plan for gradual regime change in Cuba. As part of this plan, Trump wants to make Cuba financially dependent on the United States of America, taking the place of the Soviet Union, which supported the island until 1991. Now, most likely, they will try to make some kind of deal with the authorities in Cuba, with the current authorities. Well, because I think that the authorities in Cuba also understand that those same Russians, the wild ones, are unlikely to be of any help anymore. Because even under the current blockade, they couldn't help in any way. In fact, Russia didn't even provide any humanitarian aid to the Cubans. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. Friends, if you found this episode useful and interesting, you can support our channel's work with your donation or membership here on YouTube. All the links and details are in the description of this video. I would appreciate your support. That's it for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.